Hello and welcome to The Positive Shift, a podcast hosted by Simcoe Addiction and Mental Health, where we focus on shifting perspectives on the journey of mental health and addiction recovery. Our goal is to create a safe and supportive space for those who are struggling and to provide guidance, hope, and encouragement. We understand that the road to recovery and self-improvement can be a challenging one. However, it's not something you have to do alone. Whether you are someone who is dealing with mental health and/or addiction, we believe that every story has value and can help others feel seen and heard. Our goal with this podcast is to bring together experts and real-life experiences to provide practical and meaningful insights into the process of healing. We want you to know that you are not defined by your struggles and that there is always a way to move forward. We are here to listen, to support, and to offer a shoulder to lean on as you take the important steps towards a better, more fulfilling life. So let's get started and take this journey together. Before we begin, the content discussed in this episode could be sensitive to our listeners. If you are currently in crisis, please contact Canada's Suicide Prevention Service at 1-833-456-4566 or dial 911. If you are in need of more information, please head over to our website, simcoerehab.ca, and go to our Resources tab to access downloadable PDFs, contacts, and guides. If you're looking for support and wish to seek treatment, you can email us at info@simcoerehab.ca or call today at 1-833-304-8181.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to A Positive Shift. I have a special guest today, the clinical director from Simcoe Addiction and Mental Health right here in the studio. Welcome, Raymond Moore.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here.
Oh, man, it's great to have you, buddy. I wanted to talk about a couple things today, and I hope you're open to this, because I believe, and it might be fair to say that we both have a lot of experience in this area. I don't know about you, but I went through treatment. And when I left treatment, things weren't as gravy as I thought they were going to be, right? There was a lot of difficulties that I faced. And I really didn't know, even though I had lots of great counselors in my day that would tell me all these things to potentially expect, I sort of had this belief in my mind that, things were going to be different. I don't know if we'd call it expectations to outcomes or however I wanted to frame it, but I never found myself things didn't always fall according to plan. You know what I mean?
I understand what you mean. I had the same experience when I left treatment. I really had no idea of what to do next. I know I was given a bunch of instructions, and I did the best I could to follow through with them, but I certainly did not know what to expect. And I think this is a great topic for the listeners today.
Yeah, I remember I even had a counselor say to me one time, he says, did you think about drinking today? And I said, no. And he says, well, why do you think that is? And I said, well, because I'm working real hard on myself and I'm doing all these things and I'm journaling and I'm talking in groups, right? I'm participating in my recovery. And he says, no. It's because we don't serve you alcohol here, right? and it dawned on me, right? I needed to be able to find a way to carry that level of acceptance out into the real world, if you will, and I didn't know how to do that, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this podcast today and this episode that we're talking about is I think both of us, I know both of us now have a litany of different experiences on the other side as professionals in this field. And we get to see sort of, some of the behaviors that we see in treatment, and when they're either elevated or dismissed a certain way, how they either carry over into your recovery when you leave treatment or the exact opposite. They have an adverse effect because you don't do the things that are suggested. And as a direct result, it's one of those lines where I'm really sorry you're disappointed by the results you didn't get, by the work you didn't do,
Definitely.
So I was going to start off with asking you, what do you think are some of the most important behaviors that sort of need to be, looked out for after someone is finished a 30 or 45 or a 60-day treatment stay that could potentially lead them back down that road of active addiction?
Well, I think it's going back to something you had mentioned earlier about expectations. And I think when people leave treatment, not only from the individual in treatment, but the families as well that leave treatment, there's this very strict expectation of what to expect. And I think a lot of people, when they leave treatment, one of the biggest mistakes people have is what I like to call ticking the boxes. So just assuming because I'm ticking particular boxes that everything should be going a particular way. I mean, I think in the 12-step community or in other communities, we would use the skills and tools as being specific examples of things we suggest that people utilize. And I think what ends up happening are people tick the boxes. So they do what they're told and the outcomes are not exactly what they expected. So I think, at least in my experience, when leaving treatment, things were not immediately better when I left. And I was still feeling down. I was still feeling anxious. I was still struggling with certain things in my life and not understanding, because all of the said boxes have been ticked by the individuals in my life that had kind of laid out this path for me, which was very frustrating, because if I'm not hitting those expectations, then why continue? So I think one of the biggest mistakes is essentially ticking the boxes and basically believing, because I'm doing certain things, therefore the outcome is going to be a good one. We call them tools and skills, because the more and more that you use them, the more better you get at those respective things. So kind of taking away from the expectations of everything's going to be better immediately, and understanding that this is a process. And again, regardless of the community you come from, we always say that recovery is a process. The 12 steps, it's lifelong. Recovery is lifelong. And what that actually means is that these are skills that you have to practice on a regular basis. And the more and more you do that, the more and more you will see better outcomes. So I think it's getting away from kind of essentially ticking those boxes of all the things to do post-treatment, and simply slow down a little bit, take one day at a time, and allow yourself to adapt to recovery.
That's amazing, man. And I love that you mentioned ticking of the boxes, right? Because I if you're like me, there was a lot of lip service over the years of things that I'm supposed to do. And I gotta be honest, Ray, I believed that I was going to do these things. And maybe a part of me actually believed I was doing these things. But then I was like really surprised that all of a sudden these old, and I call them, and I say the term old behaviors loosely, because if the behavior is happening now, it's not technically an old behavior, it's a present behavior. But I'd be surprised that this quote unquote present behavior was presenting in my life. And then I'm like, well, I don't understand what went wrong, So I think that's really interesting. You know what, for me personally, I had a unique experience where and I'm sure many of our listeners will also identify where they've had shifts inside, internalized shifts that sort of happened as a direct result of an experience. But me personally, I remember, do you remember the Toronto Raptors when they were playing in, I don't know if it was an elimination game or whatnot, but I guess it was against the Philadelphia team. It was a couple of years back when all of Canada was really all hyping up. They were in the playoffs. It was a really exciting time, right? And so we had, I was coming home from work. I was about a year and a half, 2 years without a drink. I was working what I thought was a really solid program of recovery. And I remember I'd read in a book, Dr. Gabor Mate in the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And he had a couple other talks along the way that I'd heard, some TED Talks and whatnot. And although sometimes controversial, he had a really interesting play that, when you remove one addiction from one hand, you're going to replace it with another. And so I sort of kind of kept my eye open for other behaviors like that, what to watch for, and one thing that we've learned is that shopping is a big thing, and it's because it's easily justified afterwards. But for what happened with me was I was coming home from work, and I went to the local grocery store. They had what was called the $1, $2, $3 sales. These types of grocery stores. So I bought a ton of junk, right? I bought like peanuts and pretzels, and I got all kinds of goodies. And right before I was leaving, I see the ice cream section. I love the ice cream, man. I love the ice cream. And so I went out and I grabbed it was $2, right? And it was, I think there was 6 ice cream bars in this box. So anyways, I put all my stuff together. I get in the car, I go home. I set up my little area for the Toronto Raptors, the elimination basketball game. And I put the ice cream in the freezer. Now, I'm watching the game. There's about, it's in the fourth quarter. There's like 7 or 8 minutes in the game. And I remember getting up to go to the freezer and to grab an ice cream bar. Because I'm like, yeah, I love those. Now, I open up the box. I take out an ice cream bar. I sit back down on the chair and I take off the wrapper. Now, you got a young boy at home too and some young kids. And I have a little guy at home. And you know, this ice cream bar, Ray, was, and I know that you guys can't see me right now, but I'm showing the size of it. It was tiny. It was called 55 milliliters. Now, I don't really even know what that means. Okay. All I know is it's tiny. Like it's like itty bitty juice box size for like grade 1, right? Like it was so small. So I ate it and it was in like 2 bites. But let me tell you, Ray, the single best ice cream I've ever had in my life, right? It was like rich chocolate, had almonds, it was vanilla on the inside, it was hard ice cream, and it was good, right? So I had this ice cream bar, I took 2 bites of it, and I'm sitting there, there's about 5 minutes left in the game now, and you know, I thought to myself, you know, it was only $2. You know, and it's just tiny. Like, honestly, I could eat like 3 of these things, it'd be equal to 1. So I get up to the freezer to go grab 1, and what do? I grab 2. So I sit down and I eat the second ice cream bar and I rip off the wrapper and I eat the third ice cream bar. And I'm sitting there and there's about 3 minutes left in the game now. And I'm like, you know, that was really good, man. It's a really good ice cream. You know, and I never went to prison eating ice cream. I never lost a job eating ice cream. I never lost a relationship eating ice cream. It's just ice cream. It was just $2. And the thing's tiny. And I had 3. That's like eating 1 ice cream. I'm like, you know what? To hell with it. And I go up to the freezer to grab another one and I grab 2 more. Now I eat the 4th one and I eat the 5th one. And so there's about 4 seconds on the clock. Kyle Lowry shoots the ball over to Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard steps outside of the 3-point line. He leans back. He takes the shot. He falls down. The ball is bouncing on the rim collectively for like 300 hours. The entire country of Canada is all holding their breath at the same time, right? And all of a sudden the ball's about to dance through the hoop. And all I could think about was that last ice cream bar. You see, my brain was automatically seeking something more, right? So, and what really became that internalized shift for me when I'm thinking about behaviors outside of treatment was that I have to watch where I'm justifying my action, trivializing the event, and then minimizing it altogether. And then making an absolution that I was never going to eat ice cream again. And I realized how quickly that paralleled all my drinking and all my drugging. And it was like, wow, all these light bulbs went off. Yeah. You know? And so these are the types of behaviors too that I think we should also talk about for our listeners. Like, you know, I mentioned the shopping. And again, this could also, you know, I'm sure you've heard hundreds of stories where you've met with clients or you met with people, you know, in the recovery community or maybe with yourself, but, you know, relationships, love, sex, right? Mm-hmm. All these other things that we've obviously talked about, right?
Yeah, but I think one of the keys, one of the most important parts about leaving treatment and early on in recovery is, yes, being very much aware of those behaviors. Because if you are not doing okay and you're trying to find a way to cope with not being okay, you may find yourself back to those behaviors, right? So I think it's also important, though, to not only be aware of those behaviors, but also go easy on yourself, right? So when you see old behavior shift back, don't write that off as being a failure or being something that is, you know, you're doing something wrong, and simply just identify it for what it is. If you recognize that behavior, and I mean, that particular behavior that you're speaking about clearly stuck with you, right? It's very specific to an ice cream sandwich. I mean, you really look at just simply the idea of it and it's rather silly, but when you look at how you were thinking, right? And the ability to correlate how you thought about that to what you were using before, I mean, it's quite strong. And this is part of the type of behaviors that we need to break. But with that said, also don't be too rough on yourself, right? Look back and recognize the behavior and try to adjust that behavior. And that's certainly something that a lot of people do struggle with in early recovery, is being way too hard on themselves for simply recognizing old behaviors that are as simple as changing, becoming aware of them, and then starting to make the changes necessary to actually change those behaviors. So I think it's super important when you leave, and especially if you have a bad day, and kind of a lot of times people may go home, you speak of relationships, and they may have, a silly fight with a loved one. And, the loved one is now saying things like, you haven't changed at all.
Oh, yeah.
You start to believe that you haven't changed. And then you slowly start to spiral. Well, recovery means exactly that. You're recovering yourself, which means that it takes time, right? So you may go home, you may get upset over nothing, and that's okay. And that's completely fine. And don't see this as being a lack of progress or you returning to the old behavior. Simply recognize that behavior. And if you do have a moment in which you return to that old behavior, if it does involve somebody else, apologize for that behavior, right? Make the amends, use your skills, simply take ownership of your mistake, which is the change, because families clearly will see. So if you go home and you get upset and you flip out over nothing, clearly they're going to recognize that behavior from before and associate it with before. They're not going to be able to correlate that, it takes time to switch these behaviors, and it will take time to work on these impulses and this perhaps even your emotional regulation. This will take time. So just be a little mindful, and I agree with you 100%. I think it was really cool, that story, to be able to, something as small as that, to be able to recognize a way of thinking that has been detrimental in the past, right? So I think it's important to kind of just step back and recognize those behaviors, like you said, and be okay with them, and be forgiving of yourself without kind of writing yourself off.
Yeah. No, fabulous. I like, it's also interesting that, because we talk about self-compassion, right? And a lot of us have heard these terms, self-compassion, take it easy on ourselves. And I think the most natural thing to do early on is the most natural thing, like the automatic response, is to actually beat ourselves up. Yeah. And so being aware of that, and then being aware that I'm supposed to actually be compassionate and take it easy on myself, is also a really good catalyst going forward. So, well said, man. So we've talked about some of the behaviors and some of the things to look out for. Now, what about, what suggestions do you actually have for people when they do leave treatment? Not necessarily what to look for, but what they should possibly be looking to do.
Well, I think doing exactly what they learned in treatment. So a lot of times people come into treatment and, people describe it as being a cocoon. And this is a personal annoyance for me when people describe it that way. There's really nothing within the confines of a property that, makes people listen to other people, makes people be compassionate to other people, makes people be kind to other people. This is something simply people choose to do. So one of the things I would highly suggest is that when you leave treatment, bring treatment with you. And I know that's, rather bizarre to say, but bring the dynamics that you brought into treatment with you. So if you're listening to, that strange person that you just met from New Brunswick, and you had wonderful conversations in which you listened to their story, were inspired by the story, bring home the same kind of willingness to those that you love. Be willing to listen to what they have to say, even if it differs from what it is that you feel. So prior to this podcast, I was actually speaking to one of our residents here, and this was the exact nature of the conversation, and in really taking these skills home and applying them to the people you love the most. And what that could look like is something as simple as just simply listening and being okay with being wrong about things, and, just allowing other people to, share their perspective of their opinion, even if it is completely wrong, if you completely know what they're saying is false. Simply challenging yourself to listen to what another person has to say to get an idea of what's happening. And, I say this in a lot of the groups that we have, we spend too much time focusing on each other's words. We don't spend enough time actually listening to what people are saying. And we really hyper focus on those words, and then we challenge them. So instead of actually doing that, looking beyond the words and actually seeing what's happening for the individual, if what they're saying is completely bizarre and it seems overly emotional, perhaps there's something more to what they're saying than what they're actually saying. And I know that sounds rather complicated, but allowing yourself to simply listen to what someone has to say, whether it be right or wrong, and allowing yourself to actually look at it from a different perspective, right? So that's just one of the skills, obviously, that we teach. Patience and understanding, love and support, all of those things. It's hard leaving treatment. You're going home, and you know what? Perhaps you've dealt with resentments with therapists or with your counselors or with whomever, and now you're going home to a group of people that, you know what, they didn't necessarily have, you know, X amount of groups per day, therapy sessions, and all these wonderful things. So you're kind of going home equipped with a whole set of skills or tools that your loved ones, they don't have, and they don't possess. And
they actually have resentments now.
Exactly, right? So you may find when you get home, and I mean, I know this was big for me when I got home from treatment, I was really starving for validation, right? So I could see specifically for me, the impact I had on my mom, and immediately I was looking for kind of that validation. I'm proud of you,
son. Yeah.
Totally kind of disregarding, you know, the fact I had put her through such significant pain, and probably at that point, maybe 4 years worth of pain. And then at the time for me, it was a 21-day program. I walked in and walked out just assuming there'd be a welcome home banner from treatment. And it was like, you know, my baby's home, everything's going to be different. And although my outlook of life had changed and I now had hope and I had worked through a lot of that emotional pain, the reality is she was sitting at home and did not have access to the same level of care I had. So anytime I were to have a moment or felt you know, upset or angry or whatever, clearly that would trigger her response of my old behaviors. And that would upset me because I wasn't getting the validation that I was hoping to get. You know, have you been drinking? Right. You know, if I, you know, miss the step on the stairs or whatever. And that kind of hyper focus on, you know, has he relapsed? And it would frustrate me, right? Because I really wanted that praise. Half the time people were looking around being like, you know, is he going to be upset? Is he angry? Everyone walking around paranoid. I wanted everyone to see me in a good light, right? But unfortunately, I wasn't prepared for the fact that, you know, families and our loved ones have their process as well. So I think leaving with all of these skills and these tools and all of this, going home knowing that we have to be a little bit more patient with the people in our lives and understand that they're not equipped in the way that we may be going home to. And you know, when your loved one says, oh, you know, what's that smell? Or have you been drinking? Simply understand it from being a fear that your loved one has that you've returned back to the old behavior, and maybe even see it as a compliment that they actually prefer you to be sober than not. Right. So I think definitely one of the biggest things is being prepared to understand that the world outside of treatment or the world outside of therapy may not be as kind as therapeutic communities, and just to be patient with that process and allow it to happen, but just keep using your skills, as frustrating as it may get. If you're having a bad day, connect. I mean, Jay, you're definitely one of the guys that I reach out to when times are tough, and it's usually a matter of seconds where I feel better, right? And that's using the skills. So something as simple as reaching out to somebody that can kind of slap you back to reality. Sorry, that's my terminology. But kind of slap you back to reality and put things into a little bit of perspective it is very important. So just utilizing those tools when you get out and understanding not everyone's going to have it, and be okay with that. Don't think when you go home and, you know, let's say you're trying to use some I statements and, you know, talking about how you feel and understand the importance of listening. When you get home, I mean, your significant others have been, you know, or
double
kids
duty with the kids, paying the bills, cleaning the house, keeping. I feel that.
So just being a little more prepared for, or being aware of that when you go home, I'd highly suggest.
Such important information there, brother. Thank you, man. Like, you know, it is true. Like we, you know, even prior to coming to treatment, trying to explain what's happening within us to our loved ones is much like trying to nail Jello to a tree, right? You know, it's sort of a futile exercise. I do know, you know, you mentioned too about reaching out and the importance of that. I also I think one of the things that we also didn't mention on the behaviors side of things that leads into that was beware of isolation, right? Because I mean, a lot of times prior to us coming in, I mean, if we look at our history, whether it was in the basement, our rooms, the garage, or in the backyard, or jail cells or worse, we found ourselves a lot of times that we isolating. And then when we get back out, what if we are going home to an environment where we live alone? Yeah. Right. And so then what do I do then? All of a sudden I go from this community of people to this environment where there's nobody around. And so, there was a gentleman by the name of John Harry, and he talks a lot about the opposite of addiction is connection. And, there was actually, Ray, you probably heard of this, and I think it was a special on television a couple years back, but they did a talk. So, well, what happened was in the 70s when, between the late 60s, 70s, and even probably later, the late 70s, there was an influx of different addiction coming back from the Vietnam War. There was a huge rollover of addiction, and because it hit the community so hard at one time, there was jobless rates were up, and difficulty with housing people became more prevalent. Domestic violence, crime, petty crime, and other crime was on the rise, and because of this happened at such a short period of time, they equated it to a lot of the soldiers coming home and the different addictions and traumas associated as a direct result. And so what they did was because of all this happening, they actually started putting money into different research, and so they had all the different universities and doing different studies. And there was actually a university in British Columbia, Canada, in Vancouver, where they did what was called the rat park experiment. And so they put a rat in a cage, and they put two water bottles, and they put a sugar-laced water bottle and a cocaine-laced water bottle. And what they did was they studied the rat. And the rat would sip off the sugar-laced water bottle, but it would inadvertently go over to the cocaine-laced water bottle, and then it would repeatedly drink out of the cocaine-laced water bottle until it overdosed and it died. And you see, what happened was they noticed that this happened rat after rat after rat after rat after rat. So they got thinking, trying to come up with different plausible ways to look at this. And they ended up building what was called a rat park. And so they had like this massive enclosure with multiple layers to it. They put nets and slides and ladders, mirrors and different lights, and they put multiple rats into this rat park. And now what they did was they put the same two water bottles. So they had the sugar-laced water bottle and the cocaine-laced water bottle. But here's where it got interesting. You see, the rats would sip off the cocaine-laced water bottle. Sure, they did. But they would tend to go over to the sugar-laced water bottle over and over and over again. So what's interesting is that not only did these rats not overdose and die, they actually thrived in this community. They had rat parties and rat raves and rat glow sticks, and they made rat babies, right? And they actually thrived in this community. And so I think one of the things that when I look at the dangerous behavior of isolation, especially going back into an environment where I'm all left alone to my own devices, I think one of the key components is going to make sure that I stay very well connected with various communities. Of course, at our center at Simcoe Addiction and Mental Health, we have an extensive aftercare program, and that's wonderful. And we have lots of incredible aftercare supports. But what about the additional stuff? There's other types of community-based things out there, correct?
Correct. Yeah, no, definitely. Connection is very significant. And just kind of, I want to get it just a little bit technical for a second. I mean, we really need to look at what we get from connection, right? So a lot of times people identify as either being an extrovert or an introvert, and they really rationalize that, I'm a person that prefers to be by myself. But the reality is that humans are social beings, right? And the brain responds to human connection. Typically what creates barriers there is anxieties, past experiences, traumas, and other things. But the reality is when you're connected to people, your brain is responding to that connection. So, I mean, the most commonly known thing is dopamine dopamine, of course, which is your feel good and your anticipation neurochemical, right? So you're actually feeling good as a result of being connected with people. So a lot of times those that describe themselves as being more introvert may have a tendency to feel anxious in certain situations. And, you know, that's really what holds them back. But the reality is that social connection is absolutely crucial for humans. And I mean, there's been a million different studies that are similar to the one you spoke about that all reveal the same thing, is that there certainly is a benefit to community, treatment being one. I mean, you know, individualized care is certainly effective, but there's a great power that comes in with a connection, right? So it is very important that connection is established in early recovery. So even if you are one of those people that are going home and you are by yourself, it is important to establish a community for many different reasons. Number one, to feel better. Number two, to actually expose yourself to being around other people, because a lot of times it is just simply a fear of being around other people or a very low tolerance of people in general, right? So it's important to understand that connection, it is just not a theory to, you know, have a group of friends or have a group of, or a community to be around. There's actually a neurochemical response you get when you feel like you belong to something, right? And I would certainly be one of those persons that would definitely say I'm a little more introverted. I really like my time. I really like to be by myself. But at the same time, I understand the value of being connected with people. And at times I actually force myself to actually want to connect with people. And usually when I do that, after the fact, I feel much better about myself. So what drugs do, I mean, as you know already, and the listeners know already, is the drugs release certain chemicals in your brain and they simulate real life experiences. So you did talk about cocaine, and cocaine is very synonymous with the neurochemical response of love. Right. I know it sounds crazy. Porn addiction and sex addiction seems to be one of the biggest ones that are blowing up, at least in terms of the people that I'm talking to these days. And what those things are doing, although you're looking at the particular behavior, or in cocaine's case, you're looking at the substance, but the reality is that it's actually evoking a response in your brain that's similar to love. So as crazy as it may sound, viewing copious amounts of pornography or engaging in a sex addiction is basically the brain's way of trying to experience love, which for many people may think that's bizarre given the particular behavior and whatever stigmas they may associate with those behaviors. But basically the brain is simulating a lot of those same experiences. So when you get out of treatment and let's say, for instance, you are a stimulant user, really start to emulate the same response you get from cocaine, not by finding a different substance, but really looking at what cocaine actually does to your brain. And a lot of similarities could be found in exercise. It could be found in connecting with people and having solid relationships. And all of these things can actually be simulated in a healthy way that's going to lead you to be healthy without consequences and, you know, live your life in a way that's a lot more manageable than using cocaine and clearly dealing with the consequences of that. So it's really important to understand how valuable connections really are. And the beginning of the podcast, when we talked about expectations, I was 22 years old coming out of treatment, and I had grown men telling me go to AA meetings, and I had no idea what that was even about. And I was crippled with social anxiety, and I showed up at these meetings like standing at the back, not knowing where to go, what to do, and just kept exposing myself to that social anxiety. And eventually I became a part of something and really started to learn how to really be around people. And at some point went from actually looking forward to seeing these people, which made recovery seem a lot more appealing to me. So we do have recovery communities, AA, NACA, all the 12-step fellowships out there, but communities in general. So even if that is a badminton club that you meet every Tuesday night,
the gym,
as long as they're wishing the best for you, they're a supportive place that's not, enabling you to return to old behaviors, and, you're doing something you really enjoy, we suggest that. And we certainly do that here. We suggest more than recovery-based communities, but also communities that are going to recondition your brain to experience pleasure in a different way, because that's a huge step in recovery, is learning to recondition how your brain experiences pleasure in a way that's much more healthy and sustainable. So connection is absolutely crucial. And, listeners may be thinking, oh, no, that's too much, or, groups or this or that. Give it a shot and see what happens, and try to create a community. And again, it could be of your choosing. So definitely a piece of advice out there: maintain that community as hard as that may be for you. Definitely get yourself created with a community.
Raymond, thank you so much, brother. Incredible words of wisdom. You're really absolute pleasure having you on today, brother.
Thank you.
And so for anyone listening, I hope that you enjoyed that podcast. I hope you got something out of that podcast today. I know I sure did. I love the way when you spoke, Ray, it was invoking new thoughts, right? So my domino thinking would take place, right? This thought creates another thought, and we could have probably recorded 4 hours of this because to be quite frankly, I have so many things that I want to add. But I think we'll just stop it there for today. And I think we've given a lot for our listeners to chew on and think about and process. And I'm hoping that you'll come back and we'll record a few more episodes.
I definitely will.
All right. Sounds good, brother. Okay. Thank you everybody for listening. And we'll talk to you all shortly. See you soon.
Bye, everybody.